turn it over to Rotarian Tom Dischler.
I tell you what, that talk last week was very good. It's still had to follow.
Yeah.
Bill did a great job. He really did. I titled this talk "When All Else Fails," and I'll tell you a little bit about that as we go along. But one of the things I've learned in my short years on this earth, and I think as a businessman, is that there are two things that are really important in everyday life and in overall survivability, and that's communication and information to be passed along. First of all, how many in here own a cell phone? Everybody? What if they stop working tomorrow? What if they stop working tomorrow? What about your landline at home? How many of you still have a landline at home? I still have one. What if they stop working tomorrow?
That one would bother.
Wouldn't bother you?
No.
Okay. Everything moves with communication. Whether it's information, whether it's food, whether it's transportation, everything moves with communication. Cell phones, internet, TV, commercial radio, all ways that we get information. If they stop tomorrow, how does that information get out? Can it happen? Let me take you back a couple of years. August 2005. A little storm came ashore around New Orleans called Katrina. AT&T's servers that handle all the telephone communications in that area went underwater. They were at the bottom of a Hibernian bank building. What was left of the cell towers were so jammed you couldn't get a message out. It was impossible. My wife and I, in May of 2011, were in Oklahoma. We're about 75 miles when an F5 tornado destroyed Joplin, Missouri. We watched it go by on radar. There was nothing left of the town. That one tornado destroyed 7,500 buildings. It was on the ground for 15 minutes. 4,000 homes. There was no form of communication out of that town for 20 minutes. Within 20 minutes, there was one lone voice coming out of Joplin, Missouri. He was a ham operator. He took what was left of a lawn chair, turned it into an antenna, hung it up to a partially torn down tree, and 20 minutes after the storm passed, he was the only voice coming out of Joplin, Missouri. He stayed on the air for 2.5 days without sleep, passing vital information out to rescue, search, rescue, and recovery of that town. The information coming out of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina primarily came out via ham operators. And the reasoning why, we found out a very important lesson during Katrina. Government agencies' communication systems don't talk to each other. The military cannot talk to the police cannot talk to search and rescue, and there was a tremendous void in linking these things up. Has it gotten better? No. Why? Because not only has everyone gone digital with their communication, they're now encrypting it to keep the criminals from listening in. They can't hear each other. The city of Eunice sits in a bowl. Rick can attest to that. We talked for years about the police not being able to contact 911 in Opelousas because Eunice sits in a bowl. And the radio frequency they were on, which was VHF, very high frequency, is line of sight. Until we put a repeater up in the air, we cannot hear 911 calls coming back into Eunice. That's been done. Well, in all these things I've talked about, one group comes through because they don't rely on commercial power. They don't rely on the internet. They don't rely on telephone lines. And that's ham operators. Let me take you a little walk through time. In 1873, James Maxwell, a Scotsman, presented his theory on electromagnetic fields. In 1896, an Italian by the name of Marconi sent the first wireless radio signal. He did it for over 2 miles. Miraculous. In 1901, he sent one across the Atlantic Ocean, and everything opened up. The radio waves got so busy that in 1912, Congress had to pass the Radio Act to control it. In 1970, now, has ham operators always been on the air? No. In 1917, during World War I, all ham radio operations were stopped by law. And that went till November of 1919. Once again, when war was about to break out, June of 1940, the War Department at the time stopped all communication by hams overseas. Pearl Harbor was a year and a half later, December 7th, 41. In 1946, once World War II ended, ham radio got back on the air worldwide. And it's been on the air ever since. Playing a critical role in two other little conflicts, one called Korea and one called Vietnam. Mainly talking from the United States, from families to servicemen overseas. Folks, that still goes on today. There are active hams that do nothing but talk back and forth, Operation Military. Because there are areas that still can't get in with sat phones and stuff like that. There are two groups that I'm affiliated with. One is the ARRL, the American Radio Relay League, which turned 100 years old last year. We've been on the air for 100 years. ARES, which is the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, are the groups I'm talking about that show up when we have a Katrina, when we have an F5 tornado, and in the last 2 weeks in Nepal. I spent the last 2 weeks in the evenings listening to the information come out from ham operators in Nepal. And folks, it's devastating over there. There's nothing left. And they're calling for help. Now,
You could hear them talking in Nepal?
I can hear them in Nepal. We all think of ham operators, or when I used to think about it, we used to listen to this kind of stuff. Morse code. Yeah, that still goes on today. Do I use it? Do I know it? Nope, I don't. Why? About 10 years ago, the FCC did away with the need to know Morse code. We're so far level-wise, we're now utilizing what we call phone, which is voice, and we're now doing digital, where I can really take photographs, I can take spreadsheets, and I can send them digitally to another radio operator around the world. Now, what good is that? If I'm in a hospital during a crisis, I can send an entire need of medications digitally out rather than voice out. So there's no misinterpretation. Is it that hard to do? No. I brought you today, this is an entire radio station. It will do everything from Morse code through voice, and the little bitty box, which you can't see right here, on top, is a digital adapter. That coupled with a laptop and an 80-foot piece of wire, I can talk anywhere in the world. I can be up and operating in 20 minutes. Some of the things we use, and I had a couple of antennas I didn't bring in. Let me show you something real simple. This is an antenna.
How far would that transmit?
This particular antenna is for VHF. VHF is line of sight. With that antenna, I can talk to Lafayette, I can talk to Baton Rouge, but I'm hitting what's called repeaters that are up in the air at 300 feet on towers. With an 80-foot piece of wire, I can talk around the world on the HF bands. Weather doesn't play as big an issue as solar weather, where you're looking at the number of sunspots. Right now, we've got a small geomagnetic storm going on, which came off the sun, and it affects our ability sometimes to make connections. Sometimes it enhances it. There's a group out of Europe that I talk to almost every night. That's the fun part of it. The business part of it is helping out in cases of emergencies. Now, typically what we'll do is a lot of times, what happens? You got a family member that's stuck somewhere in an emergency in New Orleans during the Katrina or something like that, and they can't get word out. Take a story about Katrina. and I didn't bring the recording with me. I have a recording of a ham operator I believe he was in Minnesota. A neighbor got a text message from her brother, who was a doctor at Charity Hospital during Katrina. They evacuated most of the patients, but the doctors and some of the nurses were left, and they were stranded. Cells were down. They happened to get a text message out. Her neighbor was a ham operator. She walked next to him, talked to him. He got on the air, got in touch with ham operators in the New Orleans area, and within 15 minutes they had a helicopter rescuing this group. When all else fails, radio still works. And that's one of the reasons I got into it. It's a fun hobby, don't get me wrong. I enjoy it very much. But we do a lot of training to get ready for it. Now, how do you become a ham? Very simple.
What's ham for us? The initial.
Ham is amateur radio. Ham was it's not even an acronym. Ham was back in the old days on the key, when you were using the old straight key. If you were too heavy on the key, they said you had the hands of a ham.
Really?
Okay, and that's how the term stuck.
Really?
Amateur radio is what we call it. And there are literally thousands of frequencies we can talk on. And as you move up, there are 3 levels of an amateur operator. As you move up, you get more privileges on the various frequencies. Your first is a technician class, second is general, and last is extra. Who gives the test? We do. The FCC empowered us through a volunteer examination group to be able to give tests to take your ham license. It's really expensive to take your license. It costs $15.